The hangar doors slid open, revealing a $20 million jet. Lauren Steele, the youngest CEO in the industry, stood with arms crossed, her stilettos clicking against concrete. Before her stood Aaron Cole, a grease-stained maintenance worker. The billion-dollar deal was on the line. The primary pilot had just collapsed. Lauren looked at Aaron's oil-covered hands and let out a cold, mocking laugh. She pointed toward the cockpit. "Fly it, then we'll talk." The staff erupted in laughter. Aaron didn't smile. He didn't hesitate. He walked toward the stairroom, and he didn't look back. The vast sky was finally calling. Aaron Cole was 45 years old, and to the world, he was invisible. He was the man who fueled the planes, the man who checked the oil, the man who made sure the billionaires had enough ice for their scotch before they touched the sky. He lived in a small, cramped apartment near the edge of the runway with his 8-year-old daughter, Emily. Every day, Emily would sit by the rusty chain-link fence, waving at the thunderous machines taking flight, waiting for her father to finish his 12-hour shift. To Emily, Aaron was a hero who kept the silver birds alive. To everyone else, he was just a ghost in a blue jumpsuit, a nameless cog in the vast machinery of steel aviation. But Aaron had a secret buried under layers of classified documents, NDAs, and a decade of self-imposed silence. 10 years ago, Aaron Cole wasn't a janitor. He was a top-tier military test pilot. He was the man the Pentagon called when a new airframe was considered too dangerous or too unstable for anyone else to fly. He had thousands of hours in the air, handling black-budget prototypes that officially didn't exist. He had danced with the edge of space, felt the stars brush against his canopy, and broken the sound barrier more times than he could count. He lived in the Mach numbers, a world where a single heartbeat determined life or death. Then came the accident. During a high-stakes training exercise involving an experimental thrust vectoring system, a mechanical failure led to a mid-air collision. Aaron survived by sheer instinct, but his closest friend, his wingman, Jester, did not. The investigation cleared Aaron of all blame, citing the failure as unavoidable. But the guilt was a weight he couldn't drop. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the fireball in his rearview mirror. He walked away from the cockpit, surrendered his wings, and chose the most humble life he could find. He wanted to be close to the ground. He wanted to be there for Emily, to ensure she never had to wait for a father who would never return. Lauren Steele was the absolute opposite. At 39, she was the steel queen of the aviation world. She didn't believe in stories or gut feelings. She believed in resumes, data points, and ruthless perfection. Her father had built this empire, and she was determined to expand it into the stratosphere. Today was her biggest day. A global merger was happening in 3 hours, 3,000 miles away. If she wasn't there to sign the papers in person, the billion-dollar deal would crumble into dust. But life has a way of mocking even the most perfect plans. Her lead pilot, a veteran with 30 years of commercial experience, had just been rushed to the hospital with a sudden, severe heart condition. The backup pilot was stuck in a blizzard 3 states away. The hangar was a hive of absolute panic. Engineers were shouting into radios. Executives were checking their Rolexes, sweating through their silk shirts. The clock was ticking toward a catastrophic failure. Aaron was standing nearby, wiping a heavy wrench with a blackened rag. He watched the chaos with the unnatural calm of a man who had seen engines explode at 30,000 feet while inverted. He knew this plane, a customized G650. He had been the one meticulously maintaining its engines for 3 years. He knew its soul better than any pilot who had ever sat in its leather seat. He saw Lauren's face, pale, tight, and failing for the first time in her life. For a moment, he didn't see a billionaire CEO. He saw a person on the edge of a crash. One of the junior managers, frantic and looking for any target for his frustration, looked at Aaron. He knew Aaron spent more time in the cockpits than anyone, usually with a vacuum or a bottle of glass cleaner. "Hey, Aaron," the manager joked, his voice dripping with sarcasm and loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're always sitting in that seat pretending to be a captain while you're cleaning the crumbs. Why don't you take us up? Or is the floor wax too heavy for you?" A few mechanics chuckled nervously. They looked at Aaron's worn, oil-stained boots and the smudge of black grease across his forehead. Lauren turned around. Her eyes were like shards of blue ice. She looked at the janitor as if he were a bug on her windshield. "You," she said, her voice sharp and cold. "You've spent enough time in this hangar. Do you even know what the throttle does? Or is your brain as greasy as your hands?" Aaron looked her directly in the eye. He didn't blink. He didn't stutter. The noise of the hangar seemed to fade into a dull hum. "I can fly it," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. The hangar went silent. Then the laughter started. It was a cruel, loud sound that echoed off the high steel beams. Lauren joined in, a cold, cynical laugh. She was a woman who didn't believe in miracles, only in power and pedigree. "Fine," she snapped, gesturing grandly to the metal stairs. "Fly it. Show us your talent. If you can even start the engines without blowing us all up, we'll talk about your promotion. If not, don't bother coming back to sweep tomorrow." She didn't expect him to move. She expected him to look down, apologize for his arrogance, and go back to his rag. But Aaron Cole simply dropped his wrench. It hit the concrete with a heavy clang that silenced the room. He didn't say another word. He walked toward the jet. Every step he took was different. His posture straightened, his gaze sharpened. The ghost was leaving the jumpsuit. The master was returning to his craft. The atmosphere in the hangar shifted from panic to a bizarre, high-stakes sort of comedy. Lauren Steele climbed into the cabin, followed by her trembling assistants who were clutching their laptops like life jackets. She sat in the plush, cream-colored leather seat, her heart hammering against her ribs with a rhythm of pure irritation. She was convinced this was a bluff. She was certain that the second Aaron sat in the pilot's seat and saw the staggering array of touchscreens and flight management systems, he would realize the complexity of a modern G650 and retreat in absolute shame. "Is he serious?" her lead assistant whispered, checking the emergency exit. "Ms. Steele, this is a $20 million aircraft. We can't let a maintenance man, a literal janitor, touch the primary controls. This is insanity." Lauren checked her diamond-encrusted watch. "He won't even get past the pre-flight power-up. It's a lesson in humility. Let him embarrass himself for 5 minutes while I try to find a real pilot on the phone. If he touches anything he shouldn't, security will drag him out." Outside, the ground crew gathered in a wide semicircle. Some were filming on their phones, laughing and making bets on how long it would take for him to get kicked out. "Look at him," one mechanic said, grinning. "He thinks he's a maverick. He probably thinks the yoke is a steering wheel." Aaron climbed the stairs. He felt the familiar, cold grip of the handrail. He stepped into the cockpit, a sacred space he hadn't officially occupied for 10 long, silent years. The air changed. The smell of high-grade leather, ozone, and sophisticated electronics hit him like a tidal wave of suppressed memory. It felt like oxygen finally reaching a man who had been underwater for a decade. He sat down in the left seat. The seat automatically adjusted to his frame as he strapped into the 4-point harness. His hands hovered over the dark glass screens. For a fleeting second, the ghost of Jester flickered in the corner of his eye. "The sky misses you, Phantom." "Don't keep her waiting," the memory whispered. He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When he opened them, the maintenance man was dead and buried. In his place sat a colonel. He reached out. His fingers didn't fumble. They moved with a predatory, surgical grace. Click, flip, rotate. He didn't reach for the laminated 100-page checklist in the side pocket. He didn't need to read. The startup sequence was a part of his soul, a rhythm burned into his very DNA. The avionics hummed to life. The 4 massive screens glowed with a crisp blue light, reflecting in his focused eyes. Back in the hangar, the head engineer, a man who had designed jet engines for 20 years, stopped laughing. He heard the auxiliary power unit, APU, whine to life. It didn't sound like a struggling amateur was at the helm. The pitch was perfect. The timing was flawless. Aaron's voice came over the internal comms. It wasn't the quiet, humble voice they were used to. It was deep, authoritative, and vibrated with a command that made Lauren Steele sit bolt upright in her seat, her phone slipping from her hand. "Cabin crew, secure for engine start. Ground, Clear for start on number 1. Fire guard, stand by. The mechanics outside froze. They watched the turbine blades of the left engine begin to spin. The ignition was instantaneous. No smoke, no stutter. Just a smooth, rising roar that shook the very air. Inside the cabin, Lauren looked toward the cockpit door. The mockery in her heart was being replaced by a strange, cold chill that ran down her spine. Who was this man? The way he spoke. It wasn't the voice of a man who cleaned floors. It was the voice of someone who gave orders to God. The manager who had made the joke was now ghostly pale. He didn't even look at the manual. He's doing the startup sequence from memory. He's skipping the prompts because he already knows the system responses. That's not possible for a janitor. You need months of simulator training for a G650. Aaron felt the familiar vibration of the floor beneath his feet. The jet was alive, and it was singing to him. He keyed the radio, his thumb finding the button without looking. Ground control, this is November 1 Steel Alpha. Requesting taxi to runway 09er. I have information Delta. The tower paused for a long 5 seconds. Steel Alpha, we were told your pilot was grounded for a medical emergency. Who is the PIC, pilot in command? Aaron gripped the controls. The leather felt like an extension of his own skin. This is Aaron Cole, he said, his voice steady as a mountain and twice as hard. And we have a schedule to keep. Do you want the tail number or the clearance? Lauren Steele walked to the cockpit door, leaning against the frame. She watched his hands. She watched him flip secondary switches without glancing at them, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon beyond the hangar doors. He was dancing with the machine, a silent dialogue between man and metal. You're really doing this, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the engines. Aaron didn't turn his head. His focus was absolute. You told me to fly it, Ms. Steele. I suggest you buckle up and secure your belongings. We're going to be a few minutes early for your $1 billion. The jet began to roll. It moved with a precision that was terrifying. Most pilots jerky the brakes or oversteer during taxi. Aaron moved the 20-ton machine as if it were a feather on the wind. The laughter in the hangar had completely died, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. The man they had mocked for 3 years, the man they had called Grease Monkey, was currently taxiing a $20 million aircraft toward the sun. As they reached the edge of the runway, Aaron looked at the fence. He saw a small, familiar figure in a bright yellow hat. Emily. She was waving with both hands, her face pressed against the wire. He pushed the throttle forward just an inch, a twin-engine salute to his daughter. If you believe, he thought, that some people don't need to brag about their past to prove their worth, then watch what happens when the ground finally lets go. The jet reached the hold short line. In the tower, the air traffic controllers were staring at their screens. Usually, civilian pilots were cautious, slow, and followed a very specific, almost mechanical rhythm. But the voice coming from Steel Alpha was different. It used shorthand. It used military-grade brevity. Tower, Steel Alpha, ready for immediate departure. We'll take the high-performance climb. The controller blinked. Steel Alpha, cleared for takeoff. Wind calm. Contact departure on 124.2. Aaron didn't wait. He pushed the throttles forward. The twin engines roared, a deep, soul-shaking thunder that vibrated through the hangar floors a mile away. Inside the cabin, Lauren Steele was thrown back into her seat. She had flown in this jet hundreds of times, but it had never felt like this. This wasn't a standard takeoff. This was a launch. Aaron's hands were a symphony of motion. He wasn't just flying, he was communicating with the air. He watched the airspeed indicator climb. 80 knots, 100 knots, V1. He pulled back on the yoke. The nose of the jet lifted. It didn't wobble. It didn't hunt for the horizon. It sliced into the sky at a 45-degree angle. The rate of climb was staggering. Down on the ground, the mechanics stood with their mouths open. That's a tactical departure, the head engineer whispered. You don't learn that in flight school. You learn that in the Air Force. As the jet disappeared into the clouds, the hangar became a crime scene of curiosity. The head of security, a former soldier himself, ran to the computer terminal. Get me the background file on Aaron Cole, he barked. Now! The HR manager scrambled. He's just a maintenance worker. He was hired 3 years ago. His resume said he had general aviation experience. Nobody flies a G650 like that with general experience. The security chief growled. Open the deep-level background check. Use my clearance. Back in the air, Aaron leveled off at 40,000 feet. The transition was so smooth that the champagne in Lauren's glass didn't even ripple. He turned the autopilot on and stepped out of the cockpit. Lauren was standing in the aisle. Her hair was slightly disheveled from the G-force. Her eyes were wide, her breath shallow. Who are you? She asked. The Steel Queen sounded small. Aaron looked at her. The grease was still on his face, but it looked like war paint now. I'm the man who maintains your engines, Miss Steel, and right now I'm the man getting you to your meeting. You didn't use a checklist, she said, her voice trembling. You didn't ask for instructions. You flew that plane like you owned the sky. I used to, Aaron said simply. He turned back to the cockpit. Meanwhile, on the ground, the computer screen in the hangar flashed red. Access restricted. Department of Defense. The security chief bypassed the prompt. The file opened. A photo appeared. It was Aaron, 10 years younger, in a flight suit, standing in front of a black, triangular jet that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. The text beneath the photo read, Colonel Aaron Phantom Cole, Commander Nellis Test Wing, 7,000 hours combat/test flight. Distinguished Flying Cross, 3X. The room went cold. My God, the HR manager whispered. We've had a legend sweeping our floors for 3 years. The security chief kept reading. He saw the accident report. He saw how Aaron had stayed with the burning aircraft, steering it away from a residential area, saving hundreds of lives at the cost of his own career and his best friend's life. He didn't just quit, the chief said. He disappeared. He chose to be nobody. Up at 40,000 feet, the radio crackled. It was the CEO of the company Lauren was supposed to meet. Lauren, we just got a call from the FIA. They said your flight plan was handled by someone using a classified call sign from 10 years ago. What's going on? Lauren looked at Aaron through the cockpit glass. He was staring out at the curve of the earth, a look of profound peace on his face. The secret was out. The sky had spoken, and it had recognized its master. Aaron Cole wasn't a janitor. He was the greatest pilot in the hangar, and Lauren Steele realized that her billion-dollar deal was the least important thing happening in that plane. She walked to the cockpit and sat in the co-pilot seat. Colonel, she said softly. Aaron flinched at the rank. He hadn't heard it in a decade. Tell me the truth, she said. Why did you stop? Aaron looked at the clouds below. Because I lost the joy of the flight. I only saw the machine. Today, for the first time in 10 years, I felt the wind again. The secret was gone, but a new journey was just beginning. The jet touched down at the destination airport. It was the softest landing Lauren had ever experienced. A greaser, where the wheels met the tarmac so gently you couldn't tell when the earth had taken the weight back. As the stairs lowered, Lauren saw a black SUV waiting, not for her, for the man in the grease-stained coveralls. Word had traveled fast. The FAA and the military authorities had flagged the flight the moment Aaron's old biometric data hit the system. Lauren stood at the bottom of the stairs. Her executives were waiting, but she ignored them. She watched Aaron step down. He looked tired. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the weight of the past. Aaron, she called out. He stopped. I checked the files, she said. I know about the Phantom program. I know about the accident. I know you saved that town 10 years ago. Aaron looked down at his oily hands. It wasn't enough to save my friend. You've been hiding, she said, stepping closer. You've been punishing yourself by staying on the ground. You thought that by scrubbing floors you could erase the sky, but the sky doesn't forget its own. The mocking laughter from the hangar felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. The people who had filmed him on their phones were now deleting the videos in shame. Lauren Steele, the woman who only believed in data, realized she had been blind. She had looked at a man's clothes and assumed she knew his heart. The deal went through, she said, holding up her phone. They signed it the moment we landed. They said if I had a pilot who could fly like that, they wanted to be in business with me forever. She took a deep breath. I'm not going to let you go back to that hangar, Aaron, not to sweep the floors. Aaron looked toward the horizon. I have to pick up my daughter, Ms. Steele. That's my only priority. I know, she said. And from now on, you'll do it in a car I provide. Or a jet, if you prefer. The power dynamic had shifted. The CEO wasn't giving an order. She was making a plea. She realized that having a man like Aaron Cole wasn't just a business asset, it was a second chance for her to learn what real leadership looked like. Aaron didn't look triumphant. He didn't gloat. He just looked like a father who wanted to go home. You told me to fly it, then we'd talk, Aaron reminded her with a small, tired smile. I was wrong, she admitted. We don't need to talk. I need to listen. As the military officials approached to verify his identity, Aaron turned to Lauren. I'll help you find a new pilot team. I'll train them. But I won't be your colonel. Then be my partner, she said. Aaron looked at the jet, the silver bird he had just commanded. He realized he didn't hate it anymore. The ghost of his friend wasn't screaming in his ears. It was finally silent. He had proven he could fly. But more importantly, he had proven that he could land. The secret was out. But for the first time in 10 years, Aaron Cole felt like he could breathe. The return flight was different. Aaron sat in the back this time, while a certified backup pilot handled the controls under his watchful eye. Lauren sat across from him. When they arrived back at the home hangar, the entire company was standing there. Hundreds of employees, mechanics, janitors, pilots, and VPs. As Aaron stepped off the plane, the silence was deafening. Then the head engineer, the man who had laughed the loudest, began to clap, slowly. Then everyone joined in. It was a standing ovation for the man they had walked past for 3 years without a second glance. Lauren stood at the microphone on the hangar floor. I want to make a public apology, she said, her voice echoing. To Aaron Cole. Today I learned that greatness doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears grease. Sometimes it stays silent until it's needed. She turned to Aaron. I am offering you the position of Chief of Flight Operations. You will oversee every pilot, every jet, and every safety protocol in this global company. You will have the highest salary in the firm. The crowd cheered. It was a fairy tale ending. Aaron stepped to the mic. He looked at the sea of faces. He saw the respect. He saw the awe. He looked at the clock. It was 3:45 p.m. I have a condition, Aaron said. Lauren nodded eagerly. Anything. A signing bonus? A new home? Every day, Aaron said. At 4 p.m., I leave. No matter what. No meetings, no flights, no emergencies. Lauren blinked. Why? Because my daughter waits for me at the fence, Aaron said. And I've spent too much of my life looking at the clouds and not enough looking at her. A soft murmur went through the crowd. Accepted, Lauren said, her voice thick with emotion. At that moment, a small girl burst through the security gate. Emily! She ran across the concrete, her yellow hat flying off. Aaron knelt down and caught her in his arms, lifting her high. Daddy! She cried. I saw you. I saw the silver plane. You were so high. I was, Bug, Aaron whispered, hugging her tight. But I'm back down now. Aaron looked up at the sky one last time. It was vast, blue, and beautiful. He knew he would fly again. But he wouldn't fly for the glory or the speed. He would fly because he had nothing left to hide. Not everyone who has tasted the sky wants to stay there forever. Some people find that the most important journey is the one that leads you home. If you believe that everyone's secret will reveal itself at the perfect moment, subscribe to follow our next stories and leave a comment. What would you do if your hidden past was suddenly exposed to the world?